folks at Yale hear us here? Is Robin there?
There's a head shaking.
Oh, you don't have Robin yet. Okay.
No.
All right, so let's get started. Tom, you want to start?
Yeah.
You did? Okay. Okay. My name is Peter Young. I'm the Yale class of 74, Branford College, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 11th in a series of panel webinars on careers after Yale. And this series focuses on trying to provide students and young alumni with candid, helpful views of different professions via panels of successful practitioners in each field. Today's profession is the nonprofit profession, and the overall concept here is really for this series to target professions that Yaleys pursue, but in particular ones where there are numerous myths and misconceptions about it, what is happening, and also who is best suited for the profession and what it's like once you get there. I remind you that obviously if you watch television, a lot of professions seem very sexy, you know, whether it's Law and Order or House or ER, but the reality can be quite different. And so what we're trying to do is provide a venue by which you hear sort of candid view of people who are in the profession about what it's really like. Of the 10 that we've given thus far, we've had 1,350 students and alumni who've attended the first 10, and 832 have watched the archive video of the last 7 of the panels. So this particular panel will be actually available for people to watch afterwards, and that'll be helpful for some people who just couldn't make it in terms of this particular time. Of course, there might be people who want to watch it 2 or 3 times, so that we won't stop them from doing that. Prior to this academic year, we featured legal twice, investment banking twice, medical, entrepreneurism, drama and film, and consulting. And this academic year, we've already done 2. We've done the medical profession, we did education, and now this is nonprofits. And then on April 8th, we're going to have a session on investing, which will include private equity, hedge funds, and fund management. So I think when we first started, we didn't realize how many professions that actually made sense to go through, but I think we're marching through the ones that I think really make sense from the point of view of what Yaleys are interested in. This event is somewhat unique in that we have 3 simultaneous venues. The meeting room here at Freshfields here in New York, room 211 in Lindsay Chittenden at Yale, where I see a number of Yale students coming in the door, and then we have streaming video for those people who can't be either here or up at Yale. And we do this for a very practical reason, because students tend to be up in New Haven, alumni tend to be in New York, potential panelists can be in New York or New Haven, and alumni are everywhere, right? We've actually had we had a student who was in the Yale in China program dial in at 4:30 a.m. to participate from Shanghai. So that was very, very helpful. So, and then we do have someone from the Yale Undergraduate Career Services who is quarterbacking the Yale location, Robin, and she's going to help choose questions from that location. Before I introduce the speakers here, I'd like to thank a number of people and organizations. This is a collaborative effort on the part of a number of institutions. First, I'd like to thank Elaine Mazzarella and Robin Akampora of the Yale Undergraduate Career Services, Steve Bloom, Barbara Burt, and Elizabeth Rocher of AYA, the students and alumni of Yale organizations, STAY, Julia Zipko of the Yale School of Management, Savina Dahl of the Asian American Cultural Center, Patricia Takemoto from the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, Mai Lu of the Yale Alumni Association of New York, and also Rachel Tobin of the Junior Class Council, who's head of the Junior Class Council. But all these organizations have helped in different ways, both in terms of planning, but also marketing the event to their members. And last, I want to give special thanks to Freshfields, who graciously provided the use of this meeting room and the video conference equipment here in New York. Freshfields, as many of you know, is a global law firm with 2,000 lawyers worldwide. And Tim Harkness, who is the partner, who of course is a Yale graduate here at Freshfields, who arranged for the use of this meeting room. He basically believes in the diversity of Freshfields and very happy to welcome the Yale students and alumni to this event. So why is there a need for this event? And to be honest, as smart and as resourceful as Yale students and alumni are, it's actually very hard to get credible and candid information about different professions. You should try it. See. I mean, there's some that are a little easier. I mean, I think if you have a bunch of friends who are lawyers and who know you, you can get some good advice. But some professions, it's just very, very hard. Even if you try very hard. So now the part we can't help you with, which is figuring yourself out, right? And being honest with yourself about what you're good at, what you like, what you don't like, and so forth. That, I think, is really a responsibility of each individual. But what we can do is to provide you with some candid insights from people who really are in the know, and so that you can make some intelligent choices about careers. So for today's event, I'd like to first introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to guide them through the 5 topics that were outlined in the invitation that you all responded to. And then we're going to make sure there's at least 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers from the audience. Now, those of you who are at Yale, you can just raise your hand, and Robin will help call on the right people. For those people here in New York, obviously they can raise their hands. And for those who are participating via the streaming video of the conference call, please send your questions via email to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com. I have an iPad right here, so the questions will come up, and I'll be choosing questions that are coming in from you. We do expect to end at 5:30, but the panelists have graciously agreed to stay on to answer questions and meet with the attendees who are here in New York. So let me introduce our panelists. To my far right is Ken Inadomi, who is Executive Director of the New York Mortgage Coalition. He's a Yale College BA and a Stanford MBA. We have Allison Singer here, who is a co-founder and president of the Autism Science Foundation, went to Yale undergraduate and Harvard Business School. Rebecca Schwartz is to my immediate left. She's Director of Education for Waterwell, and she graduated from Yale. And then last but not least, Ned Sullivan, to my far left, who is president of Sina Cousin, went to Williams, but then he retrieved himself and went to Yale and School of Management and the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, where he got a master's degree. By the way, which at that time was a highly unusual combination, I understand, right, in terms of that combination.
I think
right?
I was one of the first classes
to
do the joint degree.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I will serve as moderators. I won't go through the full biographies because they're in the invitation that you responded to. And I will say that all 4 of these panelists, I know, love their profession. They've decided, they have agreed to restrain themselves, and they promise to be candid and focus on both the challenges as well as the joys of their profession. So let's start. What I like to do is start and have each of the panelists, maybe starting with Ken, just take a couple minutes and say, what does their organization do? How they got into the mess, right? And sort of how they progressed through their organization. Ken?
Sure, thank you, Peter. And a hat tip to Peter Young for putting this whole panel series together. It's been phenomenal, and it's had a lot of impact on both students and alumni. So again, Ken Inadomi, I'm the Executive Director of the New York Mortgage Coalition. We are a nonprofit, we're based downtown, and our mandate is to help working class families in the greater New York area with home ownership issues. In any given year, we will counsel about 3,000 low and moderate income families and lead about 20%, about 500, to their first home purchase. I got into nonprofit through nothing less than what I call a divine intervention. I'd come from the private sector. I was driving home from my firm in New Jersey. I have a credit reporting company. And I was driving home on Highway 80 in a big X5, air conditioning on, windows up, totally insulated from the world, listening to Bruce Springsteen on the satellite radio. I stop off at a gas station because I had a craving. So I get a can of Pepsi. I don't do this often, but I got a can of Pepsi, a bag of barbecue pork rinds, and a pack of Marlboros. I go back to the car. Before I can open any of that, I hear Springsteen hollering on the radio, "Nobody wins unless everybody wins." And that struck me because I think those of you that know him know that he is the one who, his self-imposed role is to chart the distance between the American dream and the American reality. And then right after that, I get a call from my office. And they said that an email just came through that said there's a vacancy for a nonprofit executive director position for the New York Mortgage Coalition. Did I know anyone in New York who I thought I could recommend for the position? I said, let me call you back. On the drive home, I thought about this. And you know that saying that when the student's ready, the teacher will appear? I felt that this is the epiphany I needed. The next day I called back and I put my application in the ring. It turns out that they were in fact looking for someone from the private sector. I was the only one from the private sector that applied. I ended up getting the job. By the way, I never did open up the pork rinds or the Pepsi, or I never had the cigarette. But it just showed to me that the craving that I thought I had really was an emptiness. Because although I had a life of success, I really wanted a life of impact. And we'll get more into it, but that really is, I don't think it could have happened any other way. So,
Well, that is a great story. I don't know how I can possibly follow that. I'm Allison Singer. I'm the co-founder and president of the Autism Science Foundation. And if you had told me when I was a student at Yale that I would be working in the nonprofit sector, I would have told you you were out of your mind. Nonprofit was the last thing I thought I would be working in. I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 4 years old. And I worked in journalism all throughout high school and college, and I made myself a journalist. I worked my way up through the ranks at NBC News. I went to business school. I went back to NBC. I was happy as can be until the day my daughter was diagnosed with autism. And that changed my life dramatically. At that time, as I said, I was working at NBC. Bob Wright's grandson, Bob Wright at the time was the president of NBC. His grandson was also diagnosed with autism. Autism now affects 1 in 88 children around the globe. That number has skyrocketed over the last 25 years. Autism used to affect 1 in 10,000 children. Now 1 in 88 children are affected by autism. So at the time, Bob Wright decided we needed an international organization to increase awareness of the growing autism epidemic. He asked if I would step in as CEO for the first few months while we got it going, promising me I could go back to the Today Show when the 3 months were over. And I was there for 4 years. We launched Autism Speaks, which is now the world's largest autism advocacy organization. After being there for 4 years, I decided that what I really wanted to focus on was a specific niche within nonprofit, which was raising money to fund scientific research so that we could understand what is causing autism and how can we develop evidence-based treatments for autism. So I left what was a large nonprofit to found what is a small nonprofit. And there are big differences, I think we'll talk about that later, between large and small nonprofits. But I entered the nonprofit field because I felt strongly about the mission. I think people enter for different reasons. Again, I think that's something we'll talk about later, but that's how I got involved, and it's been extremely rewarding. And I have, like Ken, have never looked back, felt it was a real calling, and am happy with how I spend my day every day.
Allison?
Rebecca.
Oh, Rebecca, I'm
no
sorry.
worries.
Rebecca, sorry.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Schwartz. I'm the Director of Education for Waterwell, which is a theater and film company, nonprofit, based in Times Square. What I do for Waterwell is I oversee their theater education program. So basically we take the expertise of a professional theater company and we work intensively with one specialized public middle and high school in Times Square. So the students come from all 5 boroughs, and I think there are 2 things that really set our program apart and why I'm pretty excited every day also to go to work is that one is that the program is really comprehensive, and so it's really a long-term youth development model because we have the students for 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week for 4 to 7 years. So we really get to have to sort of see a long-term impact of arts education. So I think we're really looking at arts education as this model for really impactful youthful development, and looking at the arts as a way to think about leadership and entrepreneurship and pro-social skills in a digital age, and building people's capacity for empathy. So we do a lot of big picture thinking about arts education and why we're doing what we're doing. And then the other thing is that the artistic integrity of the projects is pretty incredible. Since we are in Times Square, we work with professional directors and playwrights and designers. So the students get a pretty amazing experience, both artistically and we think educationally. And then just 1 minute about my background is that through high school, I thought I had to be on stage and really wanted to be an actress. And then I got to college and I auditioned for a few plays and didn't get in, and then thought maybe I don't want the life of an actress anyway. So the summer after my freshman year, I had my first internship at the Public Theater to see how I felt about arts administration and whether or not I was insanely jealous of the performers or not. And it turned out I wasn't, because I found that arts administration has these really great has sort of the theater people that I'd always liked, and that you still feel really a part of the ensemble, just in a different capacity that was a little bit more about reading and writing and communicating in ways that seemed more parallel to my education. So then I interned with a bunch of nonprofit theater companies. I wanted to live abroad, so I did the Peace Corps in Guatemala after that, which was a little bit of a departure from theater, although I still managed to get some theater groups and productions in there. And then when I came back, I did a few different theater jobs for a few months, and then I've been with Waterwell, the theater company, for 2.5 years. So I sort of started from freshman year of undergrad, sort of all nonprofit all the time. So I'm sort of that perspective.
Ned?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for organizing this. I'm pleased to say that Peter's spouse is a member of my board, and that Peter is the steward of a beautiful property on the Hudson River. So we appreciate your support and your leadership in that way. I'm president of Scenic Hudson. We are an environmental not-for-profit and a land conservation organization. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. And back in the mid-'60s, Scenic Hudson launched a campaign to preserve a mountain that was threatened with a power plant. The power plant was going to be constructed on the northern face of this beautiful mountain, Storm King. And our founders decided they were going to fight that project. It took 17 years to win that battle, but in the second year they won an equally important battle, which was they won legal standing in court to represent the public and to advocate for the environment in a court of law. That decision that was made by the Supreme Court, New York's highest court, and subsequently a U.S. court, and went all the way to the Supreme Court, established the principle that citizens have standing to intervene in government decisions affecting the environment, and is considered the launching pad of the modern environmental movement. So for the 5 decades since, Scenic Hudson has been an advocate for the river, the environment, the land, from New York City up to Albany. We've created about 60 parks and preserves, protected more than 30,000 acres, and dozens of working farms. It's a great job. I love it. We have a great staff. And I think what I love most is that we have an impact. We have outcomes. Every year we've preserved over 1,000 acres of land. We've created new parks. We've connected communities, young and old, to the river, to great experiences, to the outdoors. And we have an incredibly diverse mix of skills on the staff, which is one of the things that I think is great about this field, is that you can have a background in public administration, law, communication, real estate. It's virtually the entire
spectrum of skills is represented in the environmental world. So if you have the passion to do work in this field and you have a particular skill, you can make a contribution. I'll just wrap up by giving a quick overview of my history before coming to Scenic Hudson. Before going to Yale, I spent time as a backcountry ranger in Grand Teton National Park. I worked in the backcountry of Alaska for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Then went on to Yale School of Management, Yale School of Forestry. I then went to Bank of Boston and financed environmental and alternative energy projects and created a project finance division there. I was then recruited to be the Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and went on to be the Environmental Commissioner of the state of Maine. I worked there until I learned about the job at Scenic Hudson and moved down from Maine with my family, and I've been in the job for 15 years and I've loved every minute of it.
And I'm willing to attest that Ned is a mean kayaker. So let's go on, and you know, and so we really have a good diversity of different parts of the nonprofit. I'm going to ask you to take your, the love component and tone it down a little bit, and just so, because the next question is not specific to each of your organizations, but for the nonprofit field generally. Where is it heading, both good and bad? Because there are issues of funding, all sorts of things that affect the nonprofit field generally as a group, right? So I'll let any one of you really comment or not comment as you wish.
I'll take a shot. Where's the not-for-profit world going in general, not just the environmental not-for-profit? I think, in a sense, the not-for-profit world tends to have a bad reputation as being less professional, a little lacking in glamour and charisma. But I see incredible diversity in the not-for-profit world. Probably the biggest challenge is fundraising. And the fundraising cycles go up and down. I just heard a statistic on National Public Radio that there was a downturn in total giving nationwide to the not-for-profit world after the 2008 market collapse, but that last year it kind of roared back and there was strong support. I think there is a myth on the positive side that everybody in the not-for-profit world is collaborative. And in fact, I think there are elements of competitiveness among not-for-profits in the same sector because there's competition for funding, for public attention, for a sense of who's in the leadership on issues. And but I think the good news is that you really can accomplish a lot if you are collaborative and if you look to the greater good, to what you're trying to achieve. And in the environmental world where there are so many challenges and threats, if you work together with your allies, you'll get a lot done.
Peter, yeah, maybe I did a little bit of homework. I wanted to kind of paint the landscape for the students and some of the alumni out there. In the whole U.S., there are 1.6 million nonprofits. Okay, 10% of the workforce are nonprofit workers. And this is interesting. Over the last few years, whereas the private sector has lost jobs, about 4%, the nonprofit sector has actually increased its workforce by 2%. Okay, so if you look at the growth areas, you have to look at nonprofit. The other thing, just on a vocabulary angle, we say nonprofit. I often refer to nonprofit also as the social sector. You have the private sector, the government sector. So the third sector would be the social sector, which would include nonprofit. And it's a more positive way to say it than nonprofit, which starts with a negative. Because remember, nonprofit doesn't mean no profit. It means you have to have a surplus because we do run businesses. It's just that whatever the surplus there is reinvested and it doesn't go into someone's bonus. So I think that's a key distinction that people thinking about this profession have to realize.
I would just add that I think one myth is that working in a nonprofit is all about implementing the mission every day. And at the end of the day, it's a nonprofit corporation. And most of my time is spent running the business as opposed to implementing the mission. So we have people in our organization who have, I think, 3 different sets of skills. We have people who are experts in the mission. You absolutely need that. But you also need people who know how to run businesses. And then you also need people who have specific skills in what we would call the nonprofit areas like fundraising and development that are unique to nonprofits. So although I'll say I'm happy every day, I'm not happy every minute, every day, because there are certain times of the year that I have to spend more time with the accountants than with the scientists. And that's
And
not,
you don't
that's
find them
not
the
so
most
much,
exciting people.
sorry to say, you know, you don't start a nonprofit because you want to spend time with the accountants, unless it's maybe an accounting nonprofit. But we started the Autism Science Foundation because we wanted to support families who are raising children with autism. But a lot of that is about keeping the business running, making sure we run the payroll and pay the rent and fill out all of the IRS paperwork and complete our audits quarterly on time. It's a lot of that. So, you know, I think when we think about nonprofit, we have to add the word corporation.
Now, is this true for all, you know, all 4 organizations in terms of a paperwork side, fundraising side, and a kind of regulatory side? Is that you find that true in all of your organizations? That it's kind of a necessary component, but you can't get away from it?
Yeah, definitely. I think at least Allison and I brought up before sort of smaller versus larger nonprofits. And so sort of a positive and a negative is that I think there tends to be fewer employees, so sort of less structured division of labor, at least in a lot of smaller nonprofits, which most nonprofit theater companies and arts companies are smaller. I've worked for a number of them, ranging from 3 to even Manhattan Theater Club, I think, has like 25 employees, really not a lot considering that they're a Broadway theater company that has a pretty robust season. So I think you get sort of, in terms of good and bad, you get to wear a lot of hats. So I feel like I've been lucky in the sense that I get to do a little bit of everything, but that does include its share of payroll and unemployment insurance forms and things like that.
Yeah. Any other comments about sort of myths versus realities? Because, you know, I tell you, every profession has that. I mean, now I know the number of kids who are going into forensic, criminal forensics. It's just amazing because they watch NCIS and Bones and so forth, and they think it's a glamorous job. But if you talk to anyone who's in that profession, it's pretty tedious. I mean, and 80% of the time they don't get, they aren't able to find the evidence and so forth. So are there other things like that that people should really be aware of, have their eyes open with regard to the profession generally?
I think a big myth is that a lot of the entrepreneurial talent goes into the private sector. You hear a lot about Silicon Valley. There's a huge wave now of social entrepreneurs. And you have groups like Ashoka and Echoing Green that are nurturing the young entrepreneurs. The Yale School of Management is, I think, one of the leading institutions that has entrepreneurial programs. In fact, Yale itself is entrepreneurial. So I think that the whole, if you have an idea, and if you're driven toward social change and having an impact, I think exploring all the things that are involved in nonprofit or the social sector makes sense. Because think about it, all of the systems, whether infrastructure or social, in the 21st century are going to be changing. Transportation, education, housing, healthcare, water, sanitation. I'm talking globally now. How we care for the elderly. All of that is going to be changing, and all of those areas will have a nonprofit or social sector implication. It can't all be done by the private sector, and certainly can't all be done by government.
I think another myth is that the myth is that if you leave the private sector and go into the nonprofit sector, that you won't be able to go back. I think that's completely wrong. We've had people who have been in the private sector, have had very specific skills that we've needed, for example, social media. We hired someone out of the for-profit sector who had great skills in social media, knew nothing about autism. That was fine. She was able to learn everything she needed to about autism, but she got us up on Pinterest and Twitter and every place we needed to be. And then she was able to build her skills as well and go back. So I think you can move in and out. I think that is one of the other myths is that if you go to nonprofit, you're there forever.
I think one of the risks of the not-for-profit world is that many are supported by government funding. And I think we've seen the cyclicality of government funding, the political nature of support for different sectors. So if you go to a not-for-profit that is heavily dependent on government support, I think that's a higher risk strategy. My organization, Scenic Hudson, gets almost no support, no operating support. That is our day-to-day funding from government. We do secure funding once we've purchased a property and we're turning it into a park. We apply for grants to make park improvements, or we buy land and then we sell it to the government. So we do advance our mission through government funding, but we don't depend on it.
Let me ask a very mundane but important question. For some of the professions, such as education and drama and film, we really ask the question of, what kind of income does one have? And I was actually it was very interesting to hear the answers. The drama and film people have said, it's to be an actor or so forth, it's structurally, you just can't make a great living. You got to do something else to do it. 1 out of a million people become, a famous actor or so forth, but otherwise it's really tough. There was an interesting answer about education where they said, well, it depends, right? If you work as a teacher for private school, you can make a pretty good living. You're not going to be rich, but you can pretty. So we've got some very, very different answers on this question. So on this really practical question of if you're go and work for a nonprofit, what should be a realistic expectation, and to what extent does it vary depending on what sector with regard to how you make a living, right?
I mean, I'll just say that theater, unfortunately, is really, really tough. And it's interesting working for a theater company at a school, and certainly being certified teachers is an amazing profession. But they're making probably, if you include their benefits and everything, they're probably making double what we're making, just the teachers at the public school where we're working. So as much as there's probably not enough money, I mean, there's certainly not enough money in education, certainly around the country, but there's actually really not a lot of money in theater, until you get to artistic director of really a top 10 in the country nonprofit. I would say you're not going to get into 6-digit salaries for theater. Mm-hmm. Theater, I think, is probably, and arts in general, it's really on the lowest end, I would say. In film and TV, depending, there's a little bit more money, but it's really hard to get a foot in the door. And I was going to say something about the realities, which is that at least in arts administration, it does seem like you really need to do at least one, if not more likely multiple, unpaid internships in order to build up your resume to be able to be a competitive applicant. So I happen to do, and I think a lot of people do those internships in the summers in between when they're a student, if you have the luxury of not making money on those summers. And then the idea would be when you graduate, you have enough on your resume to get a paying job, which did work out for me. But at least in the theater, right? A lot of unpaid interns, and then who also then sort of need the timing to be right after they've put in their time as an unpaid intern. It can be hard, and you have to look at the size of the organization. If it's a small organization, they're only going to have so many, they're only going to fill a position really when someone leaves, especially in theater. So it tends to be a lot about timing, and that's tough and takes kind of a bit of maneuvering and strategy, but also luck.
But I think you can also look at that as an opportunity as a younger person or a recent graduate to really have a chance to have a wide variety of experience very early in your career, which you will not have if you work in the private sector or go into consulting or banking. So in the nonprofit world, you're not going to make what you would make if you went to McKinsey or Booz or one of the big banks. But you are going to have the opportunity to learn how a business runs across all of the operating groups and I mean, you'll be in a meeting with the producer of a television show that you might be involved in, and then on the way back, you'll have to buy Staples you have to go to Staples and buy pencils. You really have to do everything, and you get a wide variety of experience. Because of that, because our salaries tend to be lower, we hire younger people. We hire people right out of college and right out of graduate school. We try to keep our salaries in line with what those people would make if they were in academia. Particularly because we fund graduate students who are doing autism research, postdoctoral students, and assistant professors. So we tend to hire people who are around that tenure, and we try to keep the salaries commensurate. But it's a trade-off. You're not going to make what you would make if you went to Bain.
Go ahead. I would like to also say that excuse me, there are jobs within nonprofit or this whole social sector that are well paid. And there are also jobs within the private sector that have a nonprofit spin. For example, most banks have a CRA, Community Reinvestment Act department. Goldman Sachs has an urban investment group department, which is committed to community development. The people in that department do very well. Morgan Stanley has a global sustainability group, same thing. And then there are also, at the relatively larger nonprofits, there are easily, many at the top level, there are many executives making 6 figures and above. So it's certainly in the smaller organizations, there's going to be a limit to how much you can make, but certainly don't think just because you're entering that area, it's going to be a lot of poverty.
Yeah, I think it really varies, right? It really varies by the organization. Where you work for the Ford Foundation, it's different.
Sure.
Still nonprofit, still same kind of mission, but they just have a different ability to pay people and so forth. Ned, you were going to make a comment?
Along the same lines, the spectrum, it runs the spectrum. Our organization, all salaries are marked to market regularly.
Mm-hmm.
We make sure that we are competitive in total compensation.
Next question is, all of you have been involved long enough so that you've seen different people, and people who've been happy and successful and people who haven't been. I probably it's fair to say that all 4 of you in your organization, have had successes among individuals and failures or so forth. Any comments on what seem to be the characteristics of the people who end up doing well and or are happy? They're not necessarily correlate each other, but sometimes they are. Any comments on that? Can you see any pattern that's kind of useful to convey to the students along the line?
I think it's a combination of a passion for the mission and the right skills for the job, as well as good interpersonal skills. Those are the 3 ingredients for success that we've seen.
I would add to that I think it's more a factor of small organization, large organization. There are large nonprofits where people do well who like to have a clearly defined job, know where their responsibility begins and where their responsibility ends. And that was more what we had at Autism Speaks. And I think that's more what you see in the private sector and large organizations. In startups, high-tech startups or nonprofit startups, the people who have done well at the Autism Science Foundation are people who like to do everything. People who one day want to be out at an event, working with families, talking to them about the early warning signs of autism, and then the next day we'll meet with the accountant and go through the financial statements, and then the next day are doing something else, and like that kind of variety, and are not really embrace the idea that they don't know what their day will be, what their day will bring, and that their responsibilities are broad, and really feel empowered by that and not turned off by that. Both are fine, but I think you really have to know yourself and know where you want to be and what you're good at and what makes you feel comfortable. And I think it's less a sense of for-profit, non-profit than small, large.
Actually, there are a lot of similarities between that and technology startups and so forth, right? Because those people have to do lots of different jobs and so forth, and of course they're constantly running out of money, so that's similar, right?
That's very similar.
so there's some similarity there. Any other comments along those lines?
Just one of the things that we didn't talk about is the so-called bottom line that drives the private sector, and the so-called double bottom line that drives the social sector. So bottom line is obviously profit, double bottom line is profit, and then the social impact, the people impact. Triple bottom line is profit, people, and then the planet, the environmental impact. Our paychecks are the same way. I mean, so we get a profit, we get our paycheck, that's the cash, but also what's our double bottom line? How many people have we helped? You know, and then what's the impact that we've had on the planet, especially for someone like Ned who's involved with Scenic Hudson. I mean, I could imagine he's, you know, I always judge people by how do they feel about Monday morning, right? I've always said that, so Mondays are only 14% of our days, but it impacts 100% of our attitude. And if you love Monday, imagine how just the rest of your life radiates outwards. So, you know, it goes much, a paycheck is a loaded term that you can look at in a lot of different ways.
Of course, those people work 7 days a week. They can't tell the difference between Monday and Sunday and so forth, right?
I would just sort of build on what I said about social skills or interpersonal skills. I think probably the single most important ingredient to success in my organization, and I think in our sector, is good team skills. The ability to work internally as a team and to constantly view the people outside of the organization as your partners. Those who've not succeeded in the organization tend to be less skilled at collaboration.
And is that one of those things where you can try to vet people very, very carefully, but you just can't completely figure it out, for, you know, in a recruiting process?
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. You can just go so far with the limited interviews you do, and then the reference checks. I'm sometimes amazed at, notwithstanding a very, what we think of as a thorough vetting process, you still only get to know a person when you've had a chance to work with them. And I think we've taken risks at times with people to achieve diversity and other goals to kind of round out our staff in different ways, and those can be hit or miss. I think you know, we're always striving for diversity. It's the first question I ask our human resources director, is to cast the widest net and go the extra mile to get the diverse candidates. Ultimately, we have to choose people who are well qualified for the job, and then make sure that we're giving them the support that they need to succeed in what is a diverse skill set and diverse set of personalities. And that's something we're really committed to doing.
What is it like what Rebecca said, which is it depends upon what job you're trying to fill? In other words, I suspect, you know, the characteristics are different if you're looking someone who's, you know, on the actual fieldwork side versus someone on the development side and fundraising, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Now, if you think about it though, I mean, of the people who've been through your organizations, right? What has typically been kind of the pattern of it? You know, do people stay for a long time? Do people stay and then they move into doing other things, so forth? Is there kind of a pattern of what people do, or when they discover that it's the right thing or not the right thing for them? Ken, any observation?
Yeah, I guess you consider it a compliment when people raid your staff and hire them away. But I lost 2 people to the private sector. One was a bank that had a CRA, Community Reinvestment Department, that took my deputy director. Went with my blessing, because whenever anyone is still stays mission driven but can further his or her career, you have to applaud that. And the second went to Ernst & Young to work in again in community development. So, you know, that's one of the drawbacks of being in an organization, a nonprofit on the smaller side. You're going to get rated by the larger firms as your people develop and mature.
I also try to look at that as a compliment. When someone leaves and goes to the private sector, I try to remind myself that maybe that's a new potential sponsor, that firm. But we have, even when I was at NBC, I've always liked hiring younger, recent graduates who are really eager and want to learn as much as possible and want to do everything from soup to nuts. And my expectation was that that type of person is going to stay for about 2 years and then go on and do something else. And that's fine, because then we'll bring in someone else, and that person who's worked with me for 2 years is now a great contact for me and for my organization elsewhere. So we've had a few people who've come to Autism Science Foundation, stayed about 2 years, and then they've gone to the private sector and also stayed within the public sector. We have one woman who was so wonderful and really took to the organization more than even I think she thought she would. We gave her a big raise, and she, I hope, will stay forever. So it really depends on what your personal goals are and what we can work out together as career path, but I never feel badly when someone leaves, unless they leave because they're unhappy, which so far has not been the case with them.
I guess I would say, I mean, our situation is a bit different because our employees are really part-time teachers and artists, although we do have mostly returning teachers for, the last 2 to 4 years they've been coming back because they really do work on a school year cycle. And I mean, for them, because they're part-time and they're paid hourly, and it's the ones who are really not thinking about the hourly pay and are thinking about they're either working on a production or they're teaching a full year class that might meet once or twice a week. And the ones who really think about their project and get excited about it and kind of just get their basically like stipend separate from that, I think, and who feel like they're a part of something. So for us as administrators, as a really small administrative staff, it's been like the community building aspect has been really important to retain people, and it's really been a priority of making it the people who do well with us are people who are really passionate about working with youth, and particularly working with youth with theater, which can be incredibly rewarding. But they sort of have to find, for us, they do have to find a lot of joy in it and fulfillment well beyond the money.
The last question I'd like to ask before we, because I promised we'd leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. This is not on the list, but the more I thought about what all of you were saying, the more I realized that there's one thing that's quite distinctive about the nonprofit, which is there's much greater diversity with regard to the types of organizations, their mission, their locations, and so forth, than say, you go to law school, it's a lot easier to figure out, what law firms to go to because there's information available and then there are only certain kinds of law and so forth. It still has some complexity, but much less complex and much less diverse than the nonprofit. I think that's pretty safe to say. So what advice would you give to the students and the young alumni who are listening to this as far as, thinking through, what the right choices are for them? And obviously, if there's someone who just says, all I want to do is a very specific environmental thing, it'll probably be pretty easy for them to figure out what it is. But that may not be true for a lot of the students and young alumni. So any suggestions that you have, that you might have in terms of sort of figuring out where the match is?
I mean, I just will say, I think I'm not quite sure, but it is really important to feel, I think, that you're passionate, because it's really a lot about the actual organization and their mission, because there are so many of the same skill sets that you're looking at, certainly I think for all of our organizations, in terms of development, special events, fundraising, programmatic things. It's a lot of the same jobs. So what motivates you, I think, is to be passionate about the industry that you're doing that job for. So, I think we all had more personal reasons for personal interests that or life circumstances that fueled the industry that we ended up in. If you just kind of want to make an impact and help people, I think you probably need to do a bunch of reading and trying some internships or informational interviews, talking to people, to really find out what their day-to-day is like and what their long-term goals are, and sort of, I think, a little bit of due diligence to figure out what your passion is. If you don't know, I think it's a bit trickier in the nonprofit sector.
There's a wonderful organization in our sector. It's called the Student Conservation Association, and it's a federally funded program that provides stipends for college graduates who want to work in the environmental field. We match the federal stipend, and then we get the Student Conservation Association employees for between 6 months and a year. And sometimes we can renew it. That is a great way to see a diversity of opportunity, because they, if you go to Student Conservation Association, and these are national, it's a national organization with regional hubs, they will have a diversity of opportunities. People like Scenic Hudson, who year after year hire people from here, from SCA. They'll get paid, they'll get to work for sort of a short time in our organization or another organization and try it out, and then go back to graduate school with a greater knowledge of what it's been like to work in that field and a particular type of organization, or move on. And then sometimes we are so happy with the people, we try to persuade them to stay after their internship. And so it's a great way of getting into this sector.
I have found that this generation of students is far more interested and involved in social issues than mine was. We work very closely with, at Yale, the Undergraduate Autism Awareness Group. We co-sponsor events with them. We co-sponsor events with groups at universities around the country, most of which have started because of student interest. And they come to us and we try to provide support. The same is happening now at the high school level. We have students in high schools who want to start autism awareness clubs. I know Habitat for Humanity has experienced the same thing, where they get calls from universities and high school groups that want to be involved. And I think that's a great way to start to learn about the nonprofit sector. I mean, when I was at Yale, there was a group of students, and you knew they were going to be a nonprofit, and they were crunchy, and they were green, and they were over here. And now I think it's far more accepted that being in the nonprofit sector is not that much different, really, from being in the for-profit sector, that you can move back and forth, that your day-to-day experience of working for the company is not that different. But what is better, I think, is that at the end of the day now, I feel like what I've done, even if I've spent the day with the accountant, is helping families to deal with a time in their life when they are in crisis, as opposed to when I was at NBC, when many days I would say, what did I do today? I produced a piece on the 50th anniversary of the Grape Slurpee. So, it's really, it's just a question of impact. So even though you're not happy every minute of every day, I think that it's something to consider more as part of the mainstream of career choice now, that it's not limiting you. You're not setting yourself up where you can only be a nonprofit if you work in nonprofit.
Well, it does sound like, if I listen to all of you, that first and foremost you're saying you have to have a passion for something, and that you got to start there. Because if you have a passion for theater, then you shouldn't be exploring a nonprofit in muscular dystrophy or something like that, because that's not where your passion is. And Ned is, he's saying the same thing. Is there's still complexity within conservation and so forth, and a lot of many choices. But you got to start out saying, this is the basic area. I have a passion.
It drives the organization. It drives everybody, and I think the achievement that we see in our work is a result of that passion.
Yeah, and even this, like, these Yale career panels, it's not an organization where it's like a virtual organization, but it started out with saying there's a problem that people are having, and so how we solve it. So it's a nonprofit in its own way, but just a different form, right?
Right. Peter, can I just,
Sure.
Whenever I hear the term passion, those, and I just want to make sure the students hear this, those that are lucky enough to truly have a passion, you're fortunate. A lot of us never really had a passion. And so I would say that you gravitate toward what you're interested in, because what you're interested in, ultimately, you can become very good at. And once you become good at something, then you can be passionate. And actually, I wanted to offer that I put together a little toolkit for students. I gave it to a group of Yale interns in New York last summer. And if you email me, I'll send you the PDF. But it talks about this whole thing of passion and interest. And it also has some of the websites and resources that you can look at to do research in your careers. I mean, there's so much information now that could help you in your search. There's Griddspan. There's the Stanford Social Innovation Review. McKinsey has a whole social sector nonprofit piece of its website. By the way, Griddspan is an offshoot of Bain. Okay, so I'm sure you know that. But let me know, and then I'll send you this, and then that'll at least help you jumpstart your personal search. If
Now,
you're so
the most
interested.
important thing, though, is you have to tell people what your email address is. So
Oh,
why don't you go ahead?
isn't that in the?
It's not in this, so why don't you go ahead
Yeah.
and tell people?
ken.i@nymc.org. NYMC is for New York Mortgage Coalition. ken.i@nymc.org.
So let's turn to the remaining time and field some questions. So let's start with some people here. Yes, go ahead.
So I might cheat and ask kind of a two-part question, and it's a little bit different from some of the previous conversation. Mike, so I direct a nonprofit that I actually started when I was in college at Yale. I'm actually Echo and Green Fellow, and I started it 10 years ago and have built it, and it's become pretty big, and it's exciting, and I love it. But sometimes I think about, one day if I want to try something else or work for a different organization. I've heard from other Echo and Green Fellows that sometimes it could be really challenging if you've had one job, you started out literally the day after graduated, you've only been an executive director, that sometimes, that could be both a positive and a negative when trying to get a job with a larger nonprofit. It's kind of the fear of, will you try to take my job because you've been an executive director before? And so my first question would be, is that a real issue, or is that just a myth that other people, talk about? And the second
Just
is
one question at a time.
Okay.
Right? Well, but that's that. We'll come back to you if we have time. Okay. So that was the first question.
I would embrace that. That would never be a negative for me. Come take my job. I mean, there's so much work to be done.
Yeah.
That when we find someone who has a track record of effectiveness, that's only a positive.
The other thing to me is age is less relevant. It's experience and your proven track record, which by virtue of the fact you said you got the Echo and Green Fellowship 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a lot of experience on your belt then. All that's valuable.
So anybody else want to respond to that? Good question. I agree with everybody. Terrific background, and I'm sure that'll transfer. So I just wanted to apologize that I can't stay for the full half hour.
Sure.
So I just wanted to ask if anybody has a question for me, I'd be happy to answer it. And then unfortunately.
Anyone have a specific question for Ned? Because he told me in advance that he had to leave about around 5:30. So does anyone have a specific question for Ned? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just curious, you said that you looked at compensation being commensurate, but I wasn't sure with what. Is it in the not-for-profit? Is it with academia? Is it with the private sector?
No, we look across sectors, and we go to a consultant that is looking at the skill set that we are looking for. So whether it's not-for-profit, government, or the private sector, we are marking our salaries and total compensation to the market
Is that
in our geographic area.
Is that atypical, do you think, in the not-for-profit world?
I think it is. We do it every year. I mean, we keep current on it. Not every year for all 50 employees, but we stay on top of it. And we find it matters. And if we're not staying with the market, we do see that we may lose people.
I think that's true of large nonprofits. So in my experience with New York Public Library, Museum of Modern Art, Consumer Reports, it's very normally done. But it's not done with nonprofits of
Any
50 or less.
any questions from the New Haven group? If so, raise your hand, and I think Robin is supposed to be there.
Okay.
Okay, Robin, you want to choose? Are there a couple of hands? Robin, you want to choose someone? We can't hear, so someone will have to turn on the sound. Well, they're looking for the IT person. Yeah, we can't hear
No, I
you.
think they're
He's
into
coming
the
to the
mic.
mic.
Right.
Oh, okay. But we can't hear anything.
Maybe they could email you the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't hear you. Is the IT person there in the room, or has he left?
So maybe I'll,
Well, okay, well, on that, why don't you,
let
Ned,
me
you
fill
need to
in.
do yeah, go ahead.
So I want to encourage people to visit our website. It's www.scenichuudson.org. We frequently have job
Just one second.
postings.
For the personal question, please email it to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com. Just email it, because we can't hear you. So if you can email it while Ned is finishing what he's saying. Okay, go ahead.
And so we do regularly have job postings. We will have job postings in different sectors of our work in the next couple of weeks. So it's an area where there are jobs regularly, and if we don't have something, we may be able to refer you to somebody else. So I'd be happy to help anyone who is interested in working at Scenic Hudson or in this sector. So thanks. I've enjoyed participating with all of you. I think you're all doing great work, and thank you very much for
Go ahead.
each and every one of you.
I have a two-part question. And the first is just, I'm always interested in biography, and a lot of education nowadays, not so much at Yale or at Williams, but at other places, is like very, I need to study in this area in order to get a job in this specific area. What were your undergraduate majors?
I was an economics major.
Okay,
I was econ as well.
okay,
I was a history major.
okay, all right.
Environmental studies and political science.
Okay, so you were kind of already,
I was on
on
track,
that
yeah.
track.
Yeah, he's a very focused person.
Do what you
All
want.
right, thanks again. Give my best to Mary.
Yeah.
The other thing is kind of related to fundraising, or what I call the nonprofit F word, and because I have a background in that sector myself.
I'm going to steal that.
But for the for the more established organizations, as far as growing a constituency of supporters, or especially for a newer organization building a constituency of supporters, how have you gone about doing that, or how have you seen that work at your organizations? Because sort of an old model used to be direct mail donor acquisition, and I just think that is less and less effective. But then, if not that, then how to build or grow a constituency of supporters?
So I find fundraising the hardest part of this. It's not something that comes naturally to me. I think I've lost a lot of friends now because when they see me coming, they turn the other way and run. I think there are people for whom it comes more naturally, and that's the type of skills that we look for when we are looking for someone for fundraising. It's someone who's naturally a social person and likes to go out and talk to people and ask them for money. And it's a very specific and unique nonprofit skill, and it tends to be one of the more compensated areas in nonprofits because it's so important and it's such a specific skill set. For us, where we've been successful in fundraising is really first focusing on friend raising and trying to build a network of supporters of the organization who believe in our mission, who believe in what we're trying to accomplish, who have similar goals. That has tended to be families who have children with autism is our natural network of support. And then the next step is to have them go out and become fundraisers. And so you build your network. I think once you can stop asking and others are asking on your behalf, that's when your organization can really take off.
And are there
Let me interrupt for a second. Robin at Yale? Robin, you can hear us, right? Okay. I can't hear you. I haven't received any email from your guys. So are you using yalecareerpanels@gmail.com? Yeah, because I haven't received anything yet. Okay. Have you raise one hand if the answer is you've sent an email. Okay, yeah, I can't hear anything, so. All right, well, when it arrives, I will. Now, there is one I'm sorry, go ahead. I think you were
Well, I
saying
just have
something.
one quick follow-up question as far as the friend raising, and again, I'm not especially interested in you with a newer organization that, you know, were there mechanisms or methods for finding those friends to, you know, start with, or, you know, was it just personal contacts, or is there any systematic way that your organization found to uncover those friends who, you know, may not, you know, not be a personal connection at the time?
I think part of it is not being shy about the work that you're doing.
Right.
And letting people know
Right.
about what services you offer and what accomplishments you've had, and trying to find people who share in your mission.
Right.
And encouraging them not only to be supportive, but to get out and build their own networks that will then support your organization.
Can I just say something real quickly? Something that had a big impact for us. Obviously, we help low and moderate income families with home ownership. We've actually had the homeowners that have gone through our program, that have raised kids through our program and sent them to school, and even had their kids go to college,
Okay.
give testimony.
All right.
Okay. From their words, the direct benefits, it has a much more impact than if I'm going to say it.
Mhm.
Another angle to think about.
Sure.
I mean, so we're a really small theater company, although we have been around for 12 years, and the education component is about 5 years old. So it's in its entirety, it's about 5 years old. So I think, yeah, for us, I mean, we have the sort of the benefit of having, you know, productions and seeing who comes to those productions. We do e-blasts in terms of, which is a little comparable to direct mail, although I mean, there's always a link to click to donate, although that's not, you know, that's not the point of our e-blast, except for an end of year appeal, and we do a Kickstarter for one big production that we fully fund, and then anyone who donates to the Kickstarter is going to get a lot of contact from us. I mean, we have a fundraising consultant on our board, and she says it's really the most important thing is to try to really just keep inviting people to events, keep them in the know, and sort of strategically doing direct asks.
Okay, I have some questions that are finally arriving from New Haven. There was a little delay. So the first question I have is from Victor Lee. It says, do you have any advice for alumni, say 10 to 15 years post-college, for breaking to the nonprofit world, especially given that we, parentheses, or others, close parentheses, may not be able to do student unpaid internships due to eligibility or financial obligations, or fit the mold of young, fresh out of college worker that Allison mentioned she likes. So it's really a question, if you've been out for 10, 15 years, you know, can't do the recent college graduate thing, how do you break in?
I think you might want to look at a larger nonprofit where there are more specific and defined roles that might be a better match with your acquired skill set, and where the salaries tend to be commensurate with the for-profit world. So I think what I was saying was more a difference between small nonprofits or for-profits and large, as opposed to nonprofit, for-profit.
Okay, we have a second question coming from New Haven, and this is from one of the students. It says, I heard two things. It is better for your skill development, career building to go into for-profit sector first. This will also allow you to build your skill sets and become a more valuable asset to the nonprofit sector. Two, however, if you go into the nonprofit first, you get caught up in it and it's hard to get out. Could you guys, quote unquote, provide some insight into the accuracy of these statements and how to address these and address them? So you may or may not agree with this statement, but that's the perception of the person asking the question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a formula. I think that, as previously discussed, you have to follow that interest. Again, if you're lucky to have the passion, but you have to follow the interest and see how that manifests. Because essentially what you want to find an avenue where you can externalize your internal skills and strengths, okay? So Victor, or I forget who the question came from. So you're 10 to 15 years out, maybe you're disenchanted with the private sector. So just kind of, think about where your life is at. There's a whole, opportunity, range of opportunities out there. Again, in the nonprofit or social sector, however we want to define it. Just do your homework. Where are the areas that resonate with you, and how do you think you can fit in and make a contribution? And then, the other thing is in the toolkit that I can send, I've got interviewing tips for interviewing a nonprofit, and also the questions that you may be asked and the questions that you should ask, okay, to make sure that you have a dynamite interview. Because that's going to be key. When we send out, I'm sure Allison and Rebecca would agree, when we send out a job opening now, 80, 90 applicants come in. It's unbelievable how competitive it is. So you have to make sure not only that you position yourself in the best light on your resume, but that if you are given a chance to have an in-person interview, you really knock it out.
Another question, we're getting a flurry of questions from the Yale group there. So the next one is, actually this is a very good question. It says, I just wanted to ask, obviously the importance of summer internships cannot be overstated, but what kinds of things that we can, as students, do during the school year to improve our post-graduation situation, assuming a non-profit sector career is what we're set on? So good question, right? Anyone want to?
So I would just reiterate, participate in the on-campus, nonprofit, extracurricular activities. We meet a lot of future employees in these groups. We co-sponsor events, and when we co-sponsor events, we're looking at the students who are running those groups as possible employees. We have summer internships. Our summer internships are actually paid, and we often recruit from the autism class at Yale, the autism class at Penn, the undergraduate autism awareness clubs at Yale and Penn and Harvard, and because those are students who've shown an interest in our field. So we have summer internships open now, actually. We just hired a woman from Penn. I would love to have someone from Yale. So the information's on our website. But get involved in those activities, and that's really how you can demonstrate your interest and passion.
Yeah, and I would say, I think actually a lot of clubs at Yale could be a great way to also test out some of the interests and passions. And I think, leadership roles, some organizations on campus are dealing with real money and are real, businesses in their own right. Also a mix of internship and work experience. I also was like a master's aide, and I feel, not that got me any jobs, but it was just administrative experience that was relevant, having been in an office.
And Yale is nonprofit.
Right.
So I understand,
right? But yeah, I think I do think it's important to not just sort of dip your toes. The first 2 years maybe you can just try out a bunch of clubs, but by junior, senior year, I think it's good to try to stick with some of the same clubs and have some leadership roles, have some, really be able to market the impact and talk about what you did and what you learned and what you contributed.
By the way, there's another thing that I know Robin will be able to share with the group in New Haven. But there's an alumni service group called YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance, which was started by a group of alums who basically pulled together all the Yale alumni involved in the nonprofit. We feel that as many as 3 out of 4 alumni, that's 100,000 alums, are involved in nonprofit, either as a direct practitioner, as a donor, a consultant, a volunteer. It's a huge population. But we have an on-campus program called the YANA Fellows, which engages students, for example, to do pro bono consulting work for other nonprofits. So the student that asked that question, check with Robin and we can help you get engaged.
Yeah, there also was like Yale Entrepreneurial Society when I was there. I'm guessing it's still there because I wasn't there all that long ago.
There's a Yale Entrepreneurial Institute as well, right?
Right, yeah, there was YES and I guess YEI also. And I know someone who went right into Ashoka from working really intensively with that their senior year. So there's also a lot of really direct connections as well.
Well, we're going to end, and because there are no more questions coming in, but I do want to make 2 comments. One is as I look across now the 11 career panels that we have done, the one thing that comes across is that the panels have all said, to the extent that you can figure out whether you really have a passion for this profession, whatever it is, drama and film, investment banking, law, medical, whatever it is. That's very, very important because you're going to spend a huge amount of your time and energy in it. And the other is to the extent that you can be honest and talk to people about what you have to be good at to do this. And then be honest about whether or not you're good at that, or at least figure out what you're good at. You know, that is an important element. And get whatever, you know, help that you can. I think the last is I do want to make one comment about this thing about fundraising that was discussed before. You know, my wife and I, we know a number of people who run some relatively very well-known nonprofit organizations in New York. And one who's in the arts area said, you know, he had so much experience on the administrative side and so forth, but had never really been heavily involved in fundraising. And he's in an organization where the amount of money you got to raise each year is a very large number. And then he said, you know, at the end of the day, it went from being a horrible thought of, you know, process to being a wonderful thought, because I just said, I have a passion for this organization and what it does. And if I can talk to people about it and they feel connected to it, you know, they will want to give money. And just like you said, the link to autism or whatever it may be, right, where people have a passion for what your mission is. And it still makes fundraising hard, but it makes a hard task a little bit easier, right? So I guess it was one other question you did raise, so I'll be fair and let you ask it, and then we'll end.
Yeah, sorry. I was curious about, you talked a little bit about the transition between private sector and the nonprofit sector, but I know all the organizations, the representatives have spoken, represent organizations that do more direct service work than funding or fundraising. But I'm interested in the transition between more of the service sector, being in an organization that provides the services, and being in an organization like the Ford Foundation, like a community investment program at a bank, how that transition works, how you think those skills carry over, and if you think they do, especially from more of like a program administrative perspective.
Boy, that's maybe we can talk offline on that. That goes,
okay.
There's a lot
Well,
to that.
why don't we do this and let's end, because it sounds like it's going to be a long answer to that question. So I want to thank everyone.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to let people know that, so the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance is sponsoring a major conference on nonprofit and social enterprise on April 5th at the Weston Times Square. We're going to be getting a save the date out, but please save the date. Saturday, April 5th. In fact, the night before, Friday, April 4th, Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, will be speaking. And then on April 5th, on Saturday, we have keynotes given by Liz Ma, Yale alum, who is CEO of Net Impact. It's going to be jam-packed full of panels on funding, on metrics, on branding, on storytelling. So please consider giving up a Saturday in April to attend this conference. Thank you.
With that, again, I want to thank everyone. I particularly want to thank the panelists who I think did a wonderful job and stayed very balanced in their answers. And I want to thank all of you who have attended. I find it extraordinary that we have a bunch of Yaleys who are still sitting in the audience over there and have not gone to the Commons and so obviously that group over there has a passion, right, Robin? So I want to thank all of you. And if any of your friends or whatever weren't able to attend because of the schedule issue, they should just go to the same link the ustream.tv/channel// Yale Career Panels, and they'll be able to watch the recording of this panel. And thank you again for all of you.
Thank you, Peter.